Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Everyday Strong with Dr. Michael G. Daniels. This is your host, CB Baker. We got another great one for you today. Boy, and when I tell you this is a great one, this is a great one. So welcome. We're welcoming a guest from the other podcast that Dr. Daniels does, is from Maximizing Your Season of Singleness. We got Angela here. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm interested to get into this conversation. And Dr. Daniels, as always, how you doing?
Great to be here, and I'm pleased that Angie could join us for today. She has some wonderful insight, but she also raised some fascinating questions that I think when you look at the topic that we have been discovering, and that is one of the difficulties of adultery and dealing with adultery and overcoming that and what causes people to fall into that trap. She has some interesting insight and questions that I think need to be explored. And so I'm looking forward to how we can look at that in a healthy and an adult way and make sure we come out with some things that will help people along the way as they move out into their future.
Yes, and I agree. Approaching this as an adult and with an open mind in this type of conversation. So I want you to go ahead and lead off with your first question.
Okay, my first question is what I would like to know. Coming from the Old Testament to the New, how did we transition from several spouses to just one? And why have things changed? That's what I'd like to know.
Well, that's a great question. You know, and it is. And I think it's one that people have grappled with for years. Because depending on your culture, that's a difficult thing to maneuver through, you know. And it also, I think, causes some people to even question whether or not our culture makes it more difficult for people not to seek an alternative lifestyle, you know, where they may have more than one person in their life in an intimate setting. But if you think about the way the culture that they were facing in Old Testament dispensation, they were dealing with the Eastern culture, right? Which is also the same culture that we come from as African Americans. When you think about how we were in Africa, on one of the trips, for example, I took to Africa, I was talking with a young man, and there were two young ladies there who had children, and I questioned one of them, and I said, you know, where is your husband at? And she said, right there. And I said, I thought he was her husband. And she said, he is her husband. And I said, whoa, okay. Well, that's an interesting concept. And so, you know, she smiled at me, and she was speaking in their language, but the interpreter was interpreting. And he said to me, that's kind of funny. You should say that. He said, because I would think that you, being in a wealthier country, would know this. And I said, know what? He said, we can have as many wives as we can afford. Okay. And that's an interesting concept. And so even today, you know, in what we call the motherland, which is on the Ivory Coast, they still practice that system, that as many wives as you can afford. And so in that Mideastern culture, they had the same kind of dynamic. Now, so even though the religious practices were focused on how God operates, it still did not remove the culture of where they were. Now you get to the New Testament dispensation, and you have the Hebrews traveling to a different part of the world. Okay. So they were planting seeds now in Europe. And so when they moved to Europe, the culture is different there. And so that culture was one of one man and one woman, you know, so forth and so on. And so therein lied the change. I mean, if you think about it, for example, if you look at the 12 tribes of Israel, we know that they came from more than one wife. Exactly. And it was acceptable. We know it was blessed because we know God blessed what was going on back then.
Right.
And so we know that, you know, and I'm not saying that it is his plan. I'm just saying he allowed that, and it was acceptable at that time. Well, the question was whether his plan, and then Jesus said that was not the original plan, right? And Jesus said, you know, that the original plan was for one man and one woman totally committed for life. That was what he said. So in one sense, he allowed it because of culture, but he also says that the best practice is one man and one woman. Okay. And so when you get to the New Testament, we then say, let's go with the best practice and not that which was allowed because of how man wanted to operate.
So let me ask this question. If it may be the best practice, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong.
Well,
right? I mean, everyone is different. I mean, it may work for some and it may not work for others. So why is it wrong? It might be best for you, but not for this person over here.
Well, wrong is a relative term, and I'm saying it this way because the Bible says that man ought to respect the laws of the land. Okay, so the laws of the land that we live in say one man and one wife, right? And so for us, that's our norm that we have to deal with. And I'll take a gospel liberty and leap somewhere else. For example, the laws of the land here say that you can't drink alcohol if you're under 21, right? But if you were in another country, you can drink alcohol under 21, right? And so therefore, if you were there and you were, drinking alcohol, it would be no problem. Here, you go to jail, right? Now, so is God upset with you because the laws are different? No, he's not, because he tells us we are to follow the laws of the land. And so since we are here in America, right? And since the American law says no, then we have to deal with no. The other question is that does the Lord want the best for us? Or does he want what we want for us? Right?
True.
And so he wants the best for us. So if you want the best of God's blessings, that means we need to follow what the Bible says, what is best for us. Jesus said this about not this particular subject, but just about things in general. He said that some men are eunuchs by birth. Some men are eunuchs because they are loyal to those above them. And some voluntarily do what needs to be necessary to become a eunuch. He said, those that have an ear, let them hear.
Okay.
And those that can accept it, let them accept it. His point being that everyone may not be able to accept everything that's best for them because of their own differences, their own culture, and just so many other things. He said, however, that doesn't mean you should not strive to do that which is best for you.
Okay. So I got a question. How much of sin is really involved in this? Dwelling within us that causes this, even the thought process.
You mean causes us to want to commit adultery?
Right.
Well, a whole lot of sin. There are two driving forces, right? And God did this for a reason, obviously, is that God made intimacy pleasurable for procreation, right? Genesis tells us that man should be fruitful and multiply.
Right.
So in order for people to procreate, you have to make it a pleasurable experience, else they won't do it. True. Right? Because that's human nature. You do that which it makes you feel good, and you walk away from that which makes you feel bad. Well, you have been a wife, right? And I believe you also are a parent, right? Correct. Right. So here's what you know about childbirth. It is not the most pleasurable experience, right? It is not at all. So what would make a woman want to go through it a second time? What would make her want to take that chance? And you go through all that pain because at some point you also want that pleasure, right? So wanting that pleasure of intimacy, you will take that shot and say, okay, go ahead out, and some of it, think about it, maybe now it's not because you have different forms of birth control. But back then, it was a method, as the Catholics call the rhythm method. I mean, that's what people use.
That's true.
There were some people that wanted to get offspring, but there's some folk that did not. And though it was, hit or miss proposition. But everybody didn't have a baby every 2 years, right? But that doesn't mean they was abstinent all that time, right? So when you so God made it pleasurable, so people would keep trying, and people would keep having babies. So that part of us is innate in us, right? So the question is, well, what then makes you want to have that same process with more than one person?
Right.
Well, that's the flesh in us, and that's what God says. That's the flesh in us, because if you think about it in a logical sense, right, especially for men, okay, it's not like you can truly keep more than one woman satisfied.
Right. That's correct.
I mean, you can try, but I'm just saying, but it's the opposite for a woman. See, a woman could really, I'm mean biologically, right? Uh-huh. Biologically, a woman is more adept at keeping men satisfied than a man is adept at keeping women satisfied. Right? But isn't it odd that in life we flip it over, right? So generally speaking, I'm just saying, right, men commit adultery more than women do. That's true. Right? That's true. But I mean, we're adept to do that. So that's that flesh. That's what the Bible says, that flesh and that inability to control our own desires.
So is that culturally the reason why men have a hard time staying faithful? Or like what is it?
That way? Are we built that way to have more than one spouse? It goes back to that. Or are we meant to have just one? I mean, biologically, that's what I wonder, really.
Well, here's what we know from nature, right? Let's say if we were to go back to natural theology, right? And natural theology teaches us to understand God through nature. Okay. So if you go back to natural theology, here's what you find, that it is rare almost for mammals. Okay. It is very rare for mammals for a female to allow more than one male to copulate. But it is not rare for a male to copulate more than one female.
Right. You can see that with lions.
Right. With lions, with our close ancestors, right? The primates, right? Which we are the closest ancestors to. So if you look at the primates and you look at us, it's not unusual for the lead gorilla to have several, females, or same thing with chimpanzees and all these kind of things. But they are operating solely on instinct, right? And see, the man's role, the male, I should say, man. The male's role was different. The male's role was simply to do this, to protect, right? To protect, right, and to ensure that the species continued. That was his primary role, to protect and make sure the species continued when you're dealing with mammals. But what Jesus says to us is different, So the idea that, is it natural? It's natural for people who don't operate off of instinct. Okay. Is it natural for people who operate off of intellect? According to Christ, it was not the ultimate way that we were designed. Okay. So if I go with the Bible again, right, and I look at how God created us, the Bible suggests that we were paired, one man, one woman. So if that's how we were initially brought about, one man, one woman, it would seem that that's how he intended it to be moving forward. But man may have looked at nature and said, hey, wait a minute. The lion has 4 lionesses, right? Or the woman may have needed protection, And if you think about that, and I just throw this out there, that happens today, right? Let's say that a man, again, remember we say the Africans say as many women as you can afford, right? Let's say if the man is upper middle class, right? And a woman husband dies. And so she loses that other income. In her mind, she may be thinking, I wish that man would take care of me, right? And so for safety's sake, he could protect her. Financially, he could help her. So she may decide, I wouldn't mind, letting him protect me. And so for that security, she may decide to engage in that kind of behavior with him, right? So it's not it's not out of the normal for that, for that to happen. And men have that, I want to, like that macho mentality as well, where they may feel like, you need protecting, right? Sure. And if you protect enough, then it's natural for people then to kind of become drawn to each other. That's true. And before you know it, you're in that relationship. And even though culturally it may not be the best place to be, it's too late.
Now, flipping the pancake on this a little bit. Let's say, for instance, people was okay with it. They, the government says you can now have multiple wives. How would this play out for the second wife wanting to date and be with another man? Because we already know that's exactly what's going to happen.
Exactly. If it's okay for women, a man, then why is it not okay for a woman? There is a such thing called, I think it's polyandry is what it's called.
Well, I think, I'm not a woman, you're the best person to answer this, but history suggests to us that rarely would happen.
True.
I'm just saying, history suggests to us that women are less likely to say, you know what, I want 4 men in my house.
That's true. I don't know. I know personally myself, I would not want 4 men in my house. I don't think I'd want 2 in my house, to be honest with you.
Right. Yeah. So something, I think it would be less likely. My counseling, and it's been a few years now because I'm older now, so I can go back, 3 decades, right? In counseling. See, women and men cheat for 2 different reasons. Men oftentimes it's just opportunity. It's just opportunity. If it's opportunity and I think I won't get caught, then I'll do it. Women tend to do it because they feel beholding. In other words, women tend to, if you are lacking a sense of self and a man gives that to you and you kind of feel beholding to him, then that's a reward. And so that's why I'm saying it's not, you don't need 4 men to make you feel good about yourself. In fact, that's not what you want.
No.
Women tend to want that one person that can just make them feel like they're on top of the world. That's true. And if he's not, you don't waste your time with him. You be like, I'm done with you because you ain't doing it for me no way.
You're right.
So that's what I'm saying. Women are less likely to try to hold on to 2 and 3 men. I'm not saying some of them don't, but they're not doing it for that reason.
That's true. There's something deeper going on. And I will say also women are more forgiving if a man cheats. Not to say that it is right, but when you think about it, I've been married before, so I can say that I have forgiven my ex-husband for infidelity more than once. Mm-hmm. But then it came to a point to where I did what I did as well, but then I left. Because I just realized this isn't it.
So when it got to the point where you did it, then it's like, I really need to be out this situation.
Exactly, because what is the point if we have to continue going through this? So men are not so forgiving, but women are. And that goes back to it once again, instead of cheating, having side chicks and all that. And I'm not saying that's what this is about, not at all. We're having, like you said, adult conversation. Why not do it right or wrong is subjective, but do it in a way that pleases everyone, so to speak. So that
you're saying do it the Old Testament.
Do it the Old Testament way.
I've had teammates back in the day at Oklahoma that told his girlfriends or told the women like, hey, I'm not exclusively with you. Mm-hmm. If you want to go with this, I'm cool with it as long as you cool with it. And I will say it worked for a little while. Mm-hmm. But then when the girl showed up with his jersey on in the stands, sitting beside his actual girlfriend, that's when everything, hit the fan. Okay. So it's like, it's one of those things I feel like it looks good on paper. Mm-hmm. It sounds good, like you could handle it. Mm-hmm. But there is a reason why Jesus said you just need to be with one. And even King Solomon, after the 700, said he refers back to the very first one. Mm-hmm. So what I get from this is you need to be with one woman in one man, one-on-one. I honestly cannot fathom having to please 2 or 3 wives. That is you'd be working yourself to death.
Well, and you can't in the context of where we are today. And I think it's all about expectation.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I say you look at the Old Testament dispensation, the New Testament dispensation, but also look at culture, because I didn't get the impression from those 2 wives I met that they had a problem. In fact, they were together, working together in the they had coffee,
Okay.
a coffee plantation. They worked together.
Right.
And so they had houses that faced each other.
See.
And I asked one of them, why is it like this? And she said, because when he's with her, he wants to be able to look in and see me to make sure no one comes in, because he still has to protect her and vice versa. So, and that's how they were. I mean, and so it works for them because the expectation is different. I think it's when your expectations are different, that's when it becomes a problem. I mean, like you talk about Solomon. I mean, think Solomon, he didn't just have wives. He had concubines.
Right.
So what you would call chicks, plural, on the side.
Right.
Now, right or wrong, I'm not saying if it was right or wrong, but I'm just saying, we look to Solomon as being wise, right? And I'm not saying he was wise, but that's what the Bible says. He was an extremely wise person. And there's no one looks at Solomon and says he was a bad person.
Right.
Not from that standpoint. Now, there's some things he did that, politically that were not expedient. But from that standpoint, no one said anything negative about him. And he had wives, plural, times, raised to the 10th power.
Right.
And he had concubines. And so his job was not to please them per se, the way we think of pleasing. His job was, can I take care of you financially? Can I take care of you financially? And he had eunuchs, and their job was to make sure nobody slipped in. So that the wives were these eunuchs, these guys, they make sure the needs of the wives were met, not intimate wives, but as far as, those physical things, clothes, food, all this kind of stuff. Again, when you look at Abraham, the father of what we call our religion, right? There's nothing in his relationship with his wives that appeared to be difficult.
Right.
Let me say this, different, not Abraham, but Abraham's offspring, because Abraham had a child other than with his wife, Sarah, but Sarah was the one that said, go into her.
Right.
It wasn't like he offered, she did. And if you go to Jacob, and Jacob had, that's where we get, the different tribes of Israel that comes from. There's nothing to indicate that Jacob's wives had a problem with each other. We don't actually start seeing jealousies until, later on, which I'm not saying there were not, but you don't see it being problematic until you get to David. And that's when you start seeing problems with, the way wives, because David's first wife became extremely jealous because of how other women looked at him. Not because he was doing anything, but just because how they looked at him, because he was apparently a very handsome and virile looking young man. But that didn't stop him from doing what he was going to do, but he still had more than one wife.
Right.
And that poses a question also of society says, no, it's not normal per se, but we tend to accept a lot of other things and not to judge when it comes to homosexuality. That's not what this is about. Just to make a point, it's okay for two men to marry, two women to marry, but not for a man to have multiple spouses. And then also I want to ask this question. What about later in life? Say if your spouse has dementia and she is no longer who she used to be, not to say you throw her away, just get rid of her. What would be the problem with having another spouse to help you, to support you in helping her? Because I have known this to happen. And the first wife was no longer herself. She was like a little girl. And I think this even happened with B. Smith, she's passed away now, but her husband had another spouse and people they had issues with it per se, because he moved on, but they were still taking care of her. She was sick. She didn't know who he was anymore. The same as with the other incident. I know if she's sickly, they go back to being little children. So if you have someone there that can help support you during that time of need, and everyone is working together, once again, it's like, what's the problem with it? I'm not speaking on going out here, men deciding, okay, I'm almost start cheating and doing this and that. No, that's not what I'm speaking on. That happens anyway. That's another topic, another question. But my thing is, what's the problem? I don't understand, once again, why it would be a problem when it comes to that. Once again, like he said, how much sin is in this? If it's in the Bible, it was in the Old Testament, not in the New. But once again, if it's best for you.
Are you looking for me to answer, or are you looking for CB to answer?
You, both of y'all, anybody.
Look, no, nobody want to answer.
Yeah, I know. Right. So you pointing a finger at him.
But, you raise a good point, right? You raise a good point, and I get it. What if and actually in one of the movies that that issue came up, right? With Angela Bassett, okay. and when she met Wesley Snipes. I don't know if you remember that movie. She meets Wesley Snipes at a bar. Waiting to Exhale, right? And Waiting to Exhale, she meets Wesley Snipes at the bar, and they talk and they become close. They have an intimate moment, but no sex, right? And Wesley Snipes says to her, I love my wife. She has cancer and is terminal, and he explains all these things to her, and he says, we can just spend the night, but we don't need to have sex. We can just help each other through a difficult time, right? Yeah. Now, I'm sure most of the women who are looking, if they knew that their husband did that, would kick them out the house. That's just the way we are. But again, what you say in theory, certainly sounds plausible. But when you take it from a Christian standpoint, and that's, what we have to look at as well, the basic Christian principle is this, that until death do you part, right? But it also says, we take a vow with our spouses, and those vows say for better or for worse. They don't say for better or for all right. That's right. They say through sickness and in health, right? And so if I made a vow to you, which says that for better or for worse, when the worst comes, I don't look for an out. That's right. Or when sickness comes, I don't look for an out. And so the issue would be, well, can I contain my physical desires if you are sick? Well, if I've said in sickness and in health, I should be able to, because the same thing could apply. Let's say there is a mental breakdown, right? And do I just say because you're crazy? And I'm using that term figuratively, not literally, but because you're acting out of your normal, do I now say, let me go in with someone else? And I'm not saying that what you say doesn't seem plausible, but I'm just saying from a biblical standpoint, based on the New Testament dispensation. If it was under the Old Testament dispensation, of course, there's a different standard that we go by. But under the New Testament dispensation, what Christ has told us, then it would be considered a sinful move in order for us to do that. Even if the woman was incapacitated somehow, because until she is dead, and Paul reiterates this as well, until she is dead, I am contractually bound to her.
Yes, I get that.
I have nothing to say.
just in case somebody's listening.
Oh my goodness!
But that is a very good point, and it also is one of the things that I have found biblically that has really trips up a lot of people is the marriage and adultery and in remarrying concept of everything, and going with what Jesus said should happen versus what's actually happening. And then really wrapping your head around that. That's the part that really, Pastor Daniels, after we had the last podcast a couple weeks ago, I went online trying to look for it. People don't even talk about it online because that's how difficult of a subject it is. It's just like, you know what? We just want to just leave this off to the side over here. So we don't want to talk about it because you might hurt some feelings, step on some toes. And because one of the most obvious things that we said is if you was divorced, but biblically it'd be okay 20 years from now to go back to your wife.
Well, it is, right? Well, not just okay, but that's the desired position to take. Right. The desired position is, again, let's put it in context first, right? Because what the Bible says is, what Paul says is that if both people are saved, right, then that's when the marriage bond is unbreakable.
Okay.
But Paul says if one is unsaved, if the unsaved not be willing to stay, then you're loose from the bond, which means if the unsaved say, I'm sick of you and I'm walking away, boom, contract is then void and you're okay to go out, and certainly to remarry. But again, he says that's the best case scenario. And he also notes that I say this by permission and not by commandment, which is saying this is what I'm saying to you. This is how you should respond. Then there's a question of, well, do you mean that we were saved when we got married? Or do you mean that we're saved now?
Right.
Yes.
It's those things. But again,
you accept it. See, if you accepted God as your Savior at a young age, and then later on, but you're not doing these things. So how does that work? That's
the thing that Paul addresses. That's why he said what he said, is that, and that's why Jesus said some can take these things, right? And he was making a general statement. Some can take these things. He said, those that can, I'm telling you what is the best approach, right? But if you act other than what's best, it doesn't mean that Christ somehow kicks you to the curb, right? But that's the best approach. Because if there's so many marriages, if you think about it, that, you used to get married in your early 20s, for example, right? And then let's say something happens and you do divorce the person. In your 40s and you look back, you start realizing some stuff. You know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Or, if we both had did something, if we both had more experience, let me put it that way. If we had more experience, we probably could have made it work.
I'm not married at all.
But I'm just saying, if you think about it, most people when they're young, they don't marry for love, they marry for lust.
Right.
That's basically what you're doing. But my premise has been, and it will always be, any woman can make any man happy, and any man can make any woman happy. I know so. The question is, what are your expectations? See, I didn't say they would make you happy.
Okay.
I said they can make you happy. Because any man can give you what you need. Any man. I recognize that men and women do this. They have a picture in their mind about what's attractive. And if they see what's attractive, that impacts their lusting. But see, lusting ain't loving.
That's true.
Right? That attracts their lusting. But lusting don't keep you in a marriage.
It's not.
It just don't. What keeps you in a marriage is loving, right? Loving happens when people start meeting needs, right? See, any man can meet your needs. Any man can make sure that you're safe. Any man can make you're secure. Any man can make you feel like you're the most important person in the world. And that don't mean he will, but I'm saying he can, right? Any man can do that.
Okay.
Any man cannot pressure you. Any man can pay enough attention to you to make you feel like he really adores me, but not too much attention that you say he's crowding me. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Any man can do that. Any man can help you achieve your dreams.
Okay.
And if he's helping you achieve your dreams, if he's making you feel safe, if he's making you feel secure, if he's doing all that stuff, he can be ugly in your mind when you first meet him. But once he starts doing all that stuff, it's going to be like, he ain't that bad.
It becomes the most attractive to
that's
you.
Right.
Actually.
That's what I'm saying. See, so what you thought initially couldn't do it, he starts to do. And you can meet the most attractive guy in the world and walk away and say, I don't know why in the world I let him in my life.
Exactly.
And that's why I'm saying it that way. And the same way about a woman. You can meet a woman and think in your mind, she is a dog. She's a dog. She look worse than a dog, right? But if she started cooking and cleaning right, if she starts taking care of your physical needs right, if she starts making you feel like a man, with the same thing happens, you'll see her in a different light. And the more you see her in a different light, the more you will cherish her. And you might not even know you fell in love with her till she walk away from you. Wow. Then you'd be like, wait a minute here. I feel something. I didn't think I felt this thing, but you know what? She's all right with me. And if you think about it, in the workplace environment, that's how cheating starts.
A lot of things start at, you're right.
Because somebody makes you feel good and you want to keep feeling good. And you may have initially not thought that person was your type, but after they keep making you feel good,
Right.
you want that feeling again.
That's true.
And that's what I'm saying. That's what the older we get, the more we can start to realize that and say, you know what, really, anybody can make me happy if they got the right stuff. And so that's why I'm saying that, if two people are saved, I'm not talking about two people are going to church. That ain't what I'm talking about. I know people who are saved. It's because if you got a saved man, right? If your ex-husband gets saved, right? He gonna approach you differently than what he used to do.
That's true.
Definitely.
That's true.
And that might change my heart a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
He's gonna come back in, number one, and saying, you know what, girl? I don't know what was wrong with me. I was the biggest fool in the world. You know what I'm saying? And he's not gonna come back just so you can get back with him. He's gonna come back because he wants to make sure that he takes care of the mistakes he made. And once he starts doing that, you're gonna start seeing him differently.
So I had a question. So what's holding the males and females from doing what you just said is making each other feel good? Like, go into it with, I want to make sure they feel like they're my number one attention or priority in the moment when we're talking to each other. Why aren't we doing that?
In my years of counseling, what I found it is fear. Fear of failure and fear of pain. Because most people feel like if I give you everything of me, I become vulnerable. And if I become vulnerable, you can hurt me easier. But it ain't true. See, I can hurt you whether you're vulnerable or not.
Exactly. Right. I've heard many people say you have to keep something for yourself. And I'm like, well, what are we keeping for ourselves?
And that's why. See, so you feel like if I give it all to that person and then they turn around and trash it.
Right.
I'm not going to do that because that's a fear. But it's the opposite is what ought to happen. Because if you want to secure a person in your life, make them feel like they are the best in the world. Here's what my father taught me at a young age. He said, you can't make a woman stay, but you can make her wish she had stayed.
Yeah. Because you can only control what you can do.
Right.
That's right.
His point was, you treat her so good that when she do leave, she'll tell the other guy, you know what? I should have stayed where I was at. And then she'll come back, just like what you're saying. But the question is, when she does come back, is he man enough to take her back? Is he man enough to say, you know what? I forgive you. Right?
Now that right there is the big one.
Yeah, it is.
That's huge. That's huge to be able, if your wife left you to go be with another man and she was gone for 6 to 8 months, and you was in the bed, snot bubbling and all by yourself, crying, and she come back, and after you got yourself back together, are you willing to take her back?
Exactly.
That's a rough one there, Dr. Daniels.
I know a man that did it. I'll tell you, my old pastor, when I was living with my father, he did it. His wife left, moved to another state with another man, and got sick and called him up. He went and got her, brought her back home, and took care of her until the day he died. You know why? Because he was truly a saved man. Oh, wow. And that's why I'm saying, see, if you have, and that's what Paul is saying.
Right.
If there are two saved people, then they show the kind of love that is not worldly love. See, worldly love says how you make me feel. Christian love says, how can I make you better? Right? You love your children, right?
Definitely.
Your main job is to make them better.
That's it.
You don't look at them having to make you better.
No.
And they disappoint you at times, don't they?
Most definitely.
But you still try to make them better.
I do.
But see, if it's a significant other, it's the opposite. I'm not saying for you, but I'm just saying, but that's how we are though, right? Sure. If it's your significant other, you look at it like, why come that person ain't making me happy? Why come that person ain't making me feel better? Why come that person ain't doing for me? But your children, you don't think that way. You always be thinking, how can I make them better? How can I do for them? So that love is to help them, and that love is not to help you. And that's the dynamic. And so the biblical part of it says differently, and again, if we go back to even our first topic, see, that's why we can't deal with what they dealt with in the Old Testament. Because see, that man who looked at having more than one wife, he was making each wife better.
He was. Exactly.
Each wife was better because they were with him. And his job was to make their life easier and to make their life better. And as long as he did that, they were happy as they could be.
Right.
Let me say this. I work for a utility company. You'd be surprised at the number of men that come in to pay bills for 2 different households.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about an adult daughter or someone that's in college. Right. They're still taking care of. They're taking care of home, and they're taking care of the second home.
Right. Yeah.
And one guy, we conversate about this. We have a couple of times. So I noticed. I said, so he'll say, pay this address here, and then he'll give me money for the next address. I said, oh, that's your friend, huh? Your special friend. And he just, hey, yeah, he'll laugh about it. I said, oh, okay. Okay. He said, you got a special friend? I said, no, I don't. But it happens. Some women know that it is happening. Some pretend they don't know it's happening. But there are several men out there that are managing 2 households, so to speak. They can afford to do that. And my thing is for women, just be open-minded. That's all. It's not for everyone. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying I'm going after anybody's husband. I want to make that clear. I'm just saying, just be open-minded to things and not let culture or society determine what's best for you.
Yeah. Another thing too, Dr. Daniels, I hear a lot at the barbershop when the old player come in the room. Oh, he say, you know what? You can do what you want as long as you take care of home. And I've heard that multiple times. And if you're young and coming up, you're like, you know what? The older guy tells me that's okay. Why do we stray so far away from the Bible when it comes to just where our elders telling us stuff, like it giving advice? It don't even be nowhere close half the time to what the Bible say.
Well, it's close to the Old Testament, but it ain't close to the New Testament. Well, you're right. I mean, that's classic barbershop talk. That's classic pool room talk.
Right.
But let me say this about barbershop talk and pool room talk, is a lot of it is just talk and a lot of it ain't reality. Okay. Now I'm not saying there aren't some men that are doing just what you said. That's God knows that's true. But there are also a lot of men that talking no good and doggone well that they ain't, that's right. Not where they are in their life or in their livelihood. Again, all I can advise folk is to look at where we are in the current dispensation period, right? And so I'm saying in the current dispensation period, if I want to be blessed by God, and that's where I'm looking at him, if I want to be blessed by God, then my job is not to try to walk away from what Jesus said, but to accept what Christ said, no matter what the world says. You know what I'm saying? So to me, my Christian walk should not be based on culture. I'm not saying culture isn't a part of how we do things, but I'm just saying that's what I should do. Culturally, even if you go to the Old Testament, those commandments, that Levitical law was put in place because culture allowed things that God said is not good for you. So sometimes we have to accept that just because it's culture don't mean it's best for us. A simple example is the eating laws, for example, right? Culturally, where they were, there was no problem eating crabs, no problem eating shrimp, no problem eating clams. But God said there is a problem, right? So he said to them, don't eat fish that don't have scales on them, because the fish that without scales are scavengers, right? So they eat dead things. And he's saying the bacteria, all these kind of things. You don't have antibiotics back then. So it'll help, it'll destroy you, right? Now, you get to the New Testament and there's a different dynamic, right? I mean, Peter happens to be in a trance and all these things that were considered bad are coming down and he's told to eat. And he said, Lord, I can't eat this stuff, is bad. And he says, what I call good, don't you ever call bad again. right? Right. And so, but that's the thing. But he said to them, listen, I'm doing things because I know more than you know about the world that you live in. And I'm trying to make sure that the world that you live in is conducive for you to prosper. And that's the key thing. That's how I'm looking at it. If you take the Bible as a whole, right? And so, yes, everything, I'm not disputing what we have been saying, because certainly culturally things can be acceptable. But that doesn't mean that it's best for us just because it's cultural. That's why, Paul says you got to live in the world, but don't be of the world, right? So just because it seems to work well, don't mean that I just say, well, let me try to take and manipulate so that I use the Bible to fit the world's plan. It should be the opposite, is that I should use the Bible to establish my plan, right? And one of the things you say oftentimes, so I can make sure I'm in the purpose that God has set me up to be in. And so if I'm looking at God's purpose, then that kind of makes me back away from man's purpose for me. Because what is God's purpose for me? And what did he say I should be doing? How does I should respond? Because that's what I'm looking for, is not the greatest fantasyful life on earth, right? I'm looking for the greatest purpose-driven life on earth, and that kind of changes things. So again, I go back to Paul, even in the New Testament. Paul says all things are lawful, but not expedient. Meaning, yes, legally you may be able to do it, but that don't mean it's the best thing for you.
Right. All right. So we've ran out of time. So is there anything anybody like to bring up before we close out?
Not that I can think of here. I just wanted to really, listening to the podcast you guys had previously, I was curious about all of it, and it just brought to mind, like, why is it wrong? I was speaking to my best friend about it and just kind of had those questions that we wanted to throw out. So I appreciate you, Dr. Daniels, for answering and you guys allowing me to come on just to talk about that a bit. So, yeah.
I think it was a great thing for us to kind of energize our mind, energize our thinking. And I just want our listeners and those who are watching us to understand, right, that the goal of the podcast is to broaden your horizon, not to dictate your behavior per se, and not to give you a license, to ruin your life, but to help you improve your life,
right?
And so even though we have topics that may be controversial, we have topics that may sometimes seem far-reaching, but you have to do that to expand your mind, and so that you can tackle those tough topics and walk away with a greater insight on how you're going to better oneself for the future. And I think this is the perfect thing for it. And I think that's what people want. And that's what we have to keep giving.
Yep. Thank y'all so much for listening and watching. This is your host, CB Baker. Till next time.